Take one. My name is Shannon Dye. I was born in 1970. My mother's name was Carolyn Jeter. My father's name was Wilbur Curtis Dye. I was born in 1970 at Methodist University Hospital, downtown Memphis. Kind of started this channel here to kind of grow a little bit, I guess, to analyze and look at my life and what happened. Of course, I won't explain all the details of what happened, but I will give the gist of what I've experienced so far. I'm a 53-year-old man. I have been a paramedic for 25 years. I was married to the same woman for 25 years. Our relationship started actually when I was about 19 years old. We got married and had our first child when I was 29. We lived through 3 states. We moved from Memphis, Tennessee to Alabama. I lived there for a while. I was doing drywall with a stepfather figure that lived with my mother. His name was Ricky. He was a really damn good guy, a whole lot nicer than some of the ones beforehand that my mother had dealings with. We moved to Atlanta for a little while, lived out there. I was doing commercial work. We did really well. We were living in a little trailer out there. It was just me and her before we were married. We moved out there and we lived, and like young people do, we ended up moving back to Alabama after my job had completed in Atlanta, outside of Atlanta. And then we moved back to Alabama, and then from there we decided to get married. And we drove back to Memphis, Tennessee, and with her family's blessing, I guess you could say, or acceptance. And we were married in a church that her parents used to go to, that she was known with the preacher and that side of the family from her family. And we were married there in that church and went to our honeymoon that night inside of Memphis. A friend of ours bought us a one-night stay at the Peabody Hotel. We were broke and young and stupid, taking on the world. So we got married and we stayed there one night at the Peabody Hotel. Had some interesting things that happened that night. One being, at the very end when we were leaving, I ended up stopping the ducks from the elevator from going up to pick the ducks up. And I got on the elevator and took it back down to the lobby. And when the doors opened, people applauded. There was red carpet stretched out, and I stepped out of the elevator, and it was entertaining, I guess I could say. And I excused myself off of the red carpet and went on to take my stuff back out to this hideous station wagon that we owned. Didn't even have a reverse in it. Crazy. But we went back to Alabama and kind of went back to life as normal, I guess you could say. And we lived with my mother and Rick, shared a house with them. But we decided to go out on our own, so we moved, and we first rented a trailer from this lady named Bernie down in Alabama. It's pretty interesting. I'm gonna be quite honest in most of this stuff. I might as well be. But we lived down there, and it was the first place that we ever lived that we could pay our rent, our bar tab, our tanning sessions, and any of the miscellaneous expenditures that we did through this lady through her bar. So we pretty much lived at that bar because we were young and we had access to alcohol and liquor and tanning and kind of treated like family, you know, because me and her son were acquaintances. We ran around together. He was interesting in himself. There's a whole other story there. But we started, you know, just cohabitating, learning each other, and living life. We were doing good together, you know. Our expenditures were really low. We had used vehicles, paid cheap rent down in Alabama. And so after we got married, my father that was there for the wedding, he said to me, he said, Shannon, you're going to get married and you're going to have kids, you know. You need to do better than what you're doing now. You're going to have a hard life doing what you're doing, trying to raise kids. You're going to be broke. That's what he told me. So he agreed to give me and Ann a place to live. Oops, I said her name, sorry. But gave us a place to stay while we were going to school. But granted, you know, I dropped out of high school when I was in, I think, the 8th grade, going into the 9th grade. I didn't return. I actually got to be about 17 years old in that low of a grade. And I went to actually register myself in school the final year at Kingsbury High School here in Memphis. The next day, a truant officer showed up at my house. It was like day after the first day, and I just didn't go on the first day. And I asked him why he was there, and he said that I had to be at school and that he needed to talk to my parents and stuff. And at the time, like I said, I was 17 years old, even though it was, you know, lower grade. That's probably what kind of threw him off, probably, now that I think back about it. But I asked him, I said, how old do you have to be to, you know, not go to school? He said, well, you have to be 17. I said, well, I'm 17. That means I don't have to talk to you. And I slammed the door, and he left. And that was the last time I went to school until we ended up in Mississippi, and my dad was talking about doing better, and we ended up there. You know, so I went and got my GED. Went and took the test there at one of the local high schools. Took me a couple times to do it. You know, the essay kind of got me. I hadn't wrote papers in a long time, but I did. I got my GED, and then me and my wife, we went down to the local community college, and we were looking at possibilities of what we could do in our future. And I was looking at these classes and stuff, and I had a couple of extra hurdles that I had to deal with. One was because I never took the admissions for college exam, so I didn't have a score for that. I had to take a entry-level test, is what they called it, I think, and they scored me. And I had to take several remedial classes, including math and English. It was all uphill for me, but we got there. I got my paramedic license, and I got an associate's degree in human sciences during that time. So I went to work as a paramedic. Initially went to school to become a nurse, but being that my wife had got pregnant, I had to move over to try to make money to support my family that was coming. And I also felt the need to have a home for my son that was going to be born. I didn't need to be living under my father's house in that one-bedroom apartment we had there, and have my son born there. That's the way I kind of felt about it. So, you know, we hustled and we grinded, and we bought this little piece of property on the backside of Diamond Head. And luck have it, faith that I was able to negotiate and get somebody to cut all the trees down for the trees. So they took the trees in lieu of payment for them cutting all the trees down, and then permits and stuff to be able to move a double-wide trailer onto that property. And like I said, we were dead broke, and we were trying to get started, so we just kind of used the property because we were able to buy it cash money. So we used it in lieu of a down payment for the trailer, but we ended up with this ridiculous interest rate, which I kind of calculated by the time we actually paid for this double-wide, we were going to end up paying somewhere around $375,000 for it. And I was like, wow. So anyway, fast forward, I'm a paramedic. She goes to school, she becomes a nurse. Horsefly bit me. Gotta kill that joker. Anyway, so she's trying to work to become a nurse, but she keeps having to stop at the end of each semester because she would get pregnant and have another child. And so we ended up having 3 children total. We had 2 boys and 1 girl. Our daughter's the baby, and right now she will turn 18 August the 31st of this year. She's living with her mother. She was initially started living with me. Left the house with her mother while I was at work, and didn't come back. Unfortunately, when she did leave, I was very angry. I said some things I shouldn't have. That's a whole nother story, I guess. I'm the bad guy on that one. I really am. Threatened to kill an animal over her leaving in the rage, which was a pet dog. I really had no intention of harming Yeah, I said it to my daughter. Not excusable. Sorry I did it. But what I did. So anyway, fast forward on ahead again. So I ended up living on, or in, I'll just say NutBush, which is inside of Memphis. I was actually born inside of NutBush, I guess you could say, as far as a native of the area. I grew up in this area right here. My best friend, Adam Bird, cut it on 4. What up, Bird Dog? Hollywood. It was my best friend. He died 6 years ago for alcoholism. I didn't know it, what I was witnessing at the time with him, but we were teenagers, and he was obviously a raging alcoholic. And not that I didn't notice it, but I guess I was caught up in doing a lot of the same stuff. You know, we were drinking pretty heavily. Minors that weren't old enough to be drinking, but old enough to be considered adults, at about 18 or 19 years old. We were working for the weekend, you know. It was back in the 80s, 1980s. We would work all week, and we'd get our little alcohol and our cigarettes and stuff for the weekend, and we were down to party. Best you could for teenagers in the 1980s. But, you know, we had a good time, I guess. Anyway, back to fast forwarding. So me and my wife, we ended up moving back from Mississippi back here to Tennessee. It was due to Hurricane Katrina. It was back in 2005. My daughter was actually supposed to be born the day Hurricane Katrina hit land. We lived on the Gulf Coast in Diamond Head, Mississippi. Pretty much ground zero for the eye of the hurricane. Devastated the area. Actually, my wife at that time was not going to be able to graduate once again to get her BSN as a nurse, because her delivering our 3rd child, our daughter, by cesarean was going to delay her to get back in school in time to finish her clinicals, and she would have to repeat that semester yet again for a 3rd time. Kind of devastating to find that out when we did, but we were going to deal with it, I guess. It had been one more semester to get her graduated. But as luck or fate had it, Hurricane Katrina hit that day. Fortunately, we were not there when the hurricane hit, because I was a paramedic. I was technically supposed to be working then, mandatory, but being that my wife was pregnant and at the end of her term, 3rd cesarean section, high risk pregnancies, they allowed me to leave and go with my wife so that I could be there for my daughter's birth. And so that's what we did. We evacuated, came up here to Memphis, watched on TV the hurricane hit, the devastation that it caused, all the havoc to it. We were up there safe, but I had family members that stayed on the Gulf Coast during that time. My father, my biological father, who gave us the room to stay down there to go to college, he was there. He was a sheriff's officer at the time. My Uncle Billy was there as well. He worked for NASA down there. He was a computer programmer for them. Down there where they test those rocket boosters and stuff, and that's what he does and deals with. Or did. He's retired now. They stayed there, and so did my stepmother Sherry, that's been my stepmother since I was a teenager. And I was sitting at my wife's aunt's house. That's where we were staying when we had her, Sarah. And I watched on the news, and I realized what they were saying, and they were talking about Diamond Head, the little city that we lived in. It was actually a private community, like a gated community that was supposed to be for retired folks, but a bunch of young guys like me come in and kind of took over. Spoiled that, I guess. But anyway, so it was a little private community area that we lived in the middle of Louisiana and Mississippi, right outside of Slidell, Louisiana, or Gulfport, Mississippi, kind of in between. And they said that 50% of the population was killed by that hurricane, by the tidal surge. Folks just drowned because of the tidal surge that come in. And I had not heard anything from my father or my uncle or Sherry that was down there that I knew was down there, and it scared me. And my daughter had already been born. We had been home 2 days prior to that. So we kind of waited, I guess, till this was almost a week after my daughter was born, after the hurricane had passed. And I told my wife at the time, I said, I got to know if my father's alive or if he's dead. And what is the status? You know, where's our property and stuff? And so I packed up some things that I needed, and a generator and some gas, and I took off in this little Ford Escort and drove all the way back. And I remember passing through Hattiesburg and going south into Mississippi, and how the terrain had just changed. I had lived there for years, for over 5 years. I had lived over down there, and went to got my GED and went to college, graduated, and started working as a paramedic there at a local ambulance service, American Medical Response in Gulfport. So a little shout out there. But I just had to know, so I drove. And then when I went and I got to Diamond Head, I went to my father's property, and I couldn't make it there all the way. There was so much debris and stuff, and I couldn't grasp really what I was looking at because it was dark, and I'm looking by the headlights of my car and a little bitty flashlight that I had, and I could tell that I couldn't make it there to the house, not by driving. So I attempted to walk down to the house, and then when I got close enough to realize that house wasn't there, it was gone. The only thing that was left was the pillars that the house stood upon, because down there all the houses are set up on pillars, and my father elected to use concrete instead of wood, and bolted the house actually by metal to the lower part of the house, the first floor, which is actually 2 floors up, and it just took the whole house off the foundation, gone, down in the woods. Found a lot of stuff days later down in the woods, just got flooded over there. So, but anyway, so I noticed that it was gone. So the next place I went to, it was dark, I went to my Uncle Billy's house, and I pulled up, and his house was there in my headlights, and what I was looking at was my father's truck and the roof of my uncle's house sitting on my father's truck. No walls, no windows, no doors, just the roof and the truck up under the roof. It kind of made me panic a little, so I headed on to my house, which was a double-wide trailer, as I said earlier. I put up in there on the north side, on the back side of Diamond Head, behind a bunch of pine trees, which saved my place. So I showed up, and there's no power, nothing, and all I see is flashlights scurrying through the front of my house. And so I got out, and I had a 40 caliber Smith & Wesson with me that I owned. And I went out into my front yard, and I called out to who was in my house. And by my delight, my father and my uncle came out, and wearing most of my clothes, and was telling me the story that they ventured through Hurricane Katrina, which also involved the tidal surge coming into my uncle's house that they were at, them swimming out of the house after it was flooded in with water, and swimming back to shore, which was my uncle's driveway, and getting out of that house and going up to the country club, where they threw them out because they had dogs with them. And you couldn't have dogs in the country club during a hurricane. It made no damn sense. So they made their way to my house, and they made shelter there. And then they saw me, and I fed them real well. And after that, I went to work as a paramedic after Hurricane Katrina for the local service. Maybe I'll put a pin in it right there, and come back, and I'll talk about a little bit more about Hurricane Katrina later. But I'm really starting this page because I'm talking about some of the things I went through after I got back into Tennessee. Me and my wife drifted apart, I guess, longer than I realized. I certainly do not want to paint my ex-wife out as a villain, and I do not want to make myself a victim. I want to be perfectly clear about that. Our divorce, I shoulder 50% of the responsibility for the failure of our marriage and our divorce. I did some things that I didn't do right. I should have done better. I should have known better. I failed myself. I've always had this huge teaching that was taught to me after I came back to Tennessee. Because I got really involved into martial arts. And I met up with a man named Jerry Mason up in Covington, Tennessee. And he had a Taekwondo school, and I wanted my children to take Taekwondo. I wanted to have martial arts. I wanted to have it when I was a kid, but I wasn't allowed to because my father thought it would make me more violent as a kid because I was having problems and I was rebellious. I fought a lot with other kids. There was a reason for it, but I'm not going to discuss it on this forum. Maybe one day if I'm ready to, I will do this. I'm not going to. But anyway, we